Hello, everybody. Two important things to say. First, I learned today how to put like animations between slides, where like if I went like this instead of just going to it, it'd be like whoa and do like a flip or something. And I made the courageous decision to not include that between every slide. So you're welcome. And then second, I miss you guys. Like I'm not gonna lie, I really enjoy being at home all the time. I've baked like 7 batches of snickerdoodle cookies. I made a cake. I made some guacamole today. My best life. But I miss appreciate how engaged y'all have been with the content. Um, Staying on top of all your stuff. A lot of my freshmen are struggling to like comment on all the roll calls and do like the smaller activities versus like participation stuff. I know y'all have been doing that because y'all been like sending me your stuff. So I really, really appreciate that. Um, I'm keeping like a mental note and I have like a note on my phone in case I forget because mental notes are the worst. But I'm keeping track of like, oh, collective gold stars still for y'all. So keep earning your stars. Some of y'all have even earned a star or two with funny roll call answers that I appreciated. Like Stockton got a star today for throwing the Bible out there for one of the books that he would take to the spiritual points. I just want to say y'all are awesome and I miss y'all. Let's learn about persuasion. We have mostly focused on informative speaking for this unit, or I'm sorry, this class, just because realistically it's what you're going to mostly do in your life. In college, you'll do a lot of informative speaking. However, there are going to be situations where you will be persuasive, and so it's still important to learn about those. And I think the best way to learn about them in the beginning is by comparing it to informative speaking, since that is what we're most familiar with. The only experience right now that y'all would have in my class, at least, with persuasion is the that sales pitch impromptu y'all did, where you had to like, pick the object out of your backpack and sell it. And that'll come in handy later, that experience, when we talk about organizational patterns. So let's go ahead and get started. For comparing informative versus persuasive speaking, it's really valuable to think about those two types of speaking as being on a continuum. Now, a continuum, y'all probably know what that is, but it's kind of like, how would you define that? I figured that out because someone asked me, well, what is a continuum? And I was like, I know what it means, but what it means. So I put definition in here just to be more clear. So a continuum, it's this if you want a visual. It's a continuous sequence in which adjacent or like similar or like touching elements are not perceptibly different from each other, although the extremes are quite distinct. So like on one end of this continuum, we informative speaking, and on the other end would be persuasive speaking. And there's not really like a black and white like line down the middle where it's like, oh, everything on this side is informative speaking, and everything on this side is persuasion. Like the difference is not always that clear. A lot of speeches are gonna, whether it's informative or persuasive, will have different goals, but they're gonna have very similar means to reach those ends. And so it's important for us to realize that like it's a more gray area than anything, the difference between informative versus persuasive speaking. There's really only a few things that are going to identify our core differences. So when you're writing a speech, and if your general purpose is to inform, you're trying to convey your information in as neutral a way as possible. So you don't want your bias or your opinion to be in there because that could sway your audience. You're just being as neutral as possible. You're just presenting facts. And you're doing that through fact-based appeals. So it's pretty research heavy. It shouldn't just be your ideas, like your ideas are great, but I want research, I want scholarly studies. And so that's what informative speaking is mostly about, just sharing information, sharing facts, and being neutral. But if your own purpose is to persuade, you are trying to change the actions or beliefs of your audience. So they're going to know what your bias or what your opinion is, because if I'm trying to persuade you to do something, you can probably take a good guess and think that, oh, my opinion or my bias is towards that thing. Um, Sorry if you can see that. I told my sisters to not say anything weird or bad while I'm recording this video. Anyway, keeping it Shiloh approved during quarantine. So the persuasive speaker is going to be attempting to change the beliefs of their audience. We're talking about her fat baby. He's a really fat baby. He turned 2 today. Happy birthday, Peter. I'm getting so off track. I'm so distracted today. Sorry, y'all. Changing actions or beliefs of the audience through fact-based appeals and emotional language. And so that's kind of where that gray area comes in. Like, when you're giving an informative speech, yeah, mostly fact-based appeals. Of course, still using delivery to keep it interesting and not just being the most boring person ever. But then when you start persuading, you're going to bring in that emotional language. But the fact-based appeals are still the most important thing in persuasion. If it's only emotional language, that's not super ethical. And like for an extreme example, like Adolf Hitler, like rose to power because he was a very, very gifted speaker, used a lot of emotional language, and relied on um, fear and anger of the German people to gain more followers. So just facts can be unethical. That was kind of a big leap. I'm not saying y'all are going to be like Hitler if you just use emotional appeals, but to give you a comparison of like, oh, that's how dangerous it can be. Another example, I don't know if y'all have heard of like the Red Scare in history class, but like when the communist movement, everyone was like really scared it would come to the United States, and there was like the Hollywood blacklist, and everyone was like, "Oh man, so nervous about like communists coming here. Maybe you're a communist. Maybe you're a communist." And it was just a lot of like fear mongering. So like that's kind of persuasion based on emotional language. And so obviously y'all don't want to be speakers that are compared to those kind of people. You're going to be good ethical speakers and effective speakers. Um, and so if you use a good balance of fact-based appeals and emotional language, you can be a really effective and really ethical speaker. And who doesn't want to be both of those things? And second thing, audiences in an informative speech are going to be relatively passive and just seeking to receive information. And so there's a big emphasis again on delivery, making sure that your content is clear, it's neutral, it makes sense, but also that you are, delivering it in a way that makes sense and is interesting. But audiences in a persuasive speech are a lot more active. There's a lot of cognitive processing going on because they're trying to process and filter that information to formulate opinions and make decisions. Um, and so you're going to have an audience that's maybe going to have more questions. At the end of a speech, usually a Q&A might occur. So you should be prepared with a lot of research. You can um, give them responses that maybe you didn't cover in your speech, and be prepared to have a discussion with somebody who may disagree with you afterwards. Um, and just realize that you're talking to not necessarily a more educated audience, but a more aware audience. Like they're there to be persuaded, they're there to have their actions or beliefs changed. And so you have to be very careful to make sure you're speaking to that kind of audience. So that's why last unit we talked about how important it is to consider the context, because it's important, of course, to know what your general purpose is, but also like know who your audience is. Last thing, providing information to an audience is one thing, but creating successful understanding and then acceptance of that information to be persuaded is quite another. So, as a speaker, you need strong credibility. You can't just go up on a stage and talk about anything and try to persuade your audience to do anything and things are just going to work. Like, you need to be credible. You must behave ethically. You must prove that you are credible and you are trustworthy and demonstrate that you are speaking in a way that shows that you care about your audience's well-being and that this information is going to be good for them. And then remember that your audiences filter explanations through their own experiences, knowledge, and perceptions. And we talked about this a little bit in our unit 6 about like speech context. We talked about who's the audience, talked about demographics. And that's why this is important to know, because audiences are different and they're going to filter information differently. Um, and when we talked about who's the audience, we discussed different kind of audience analysis strategies you can utilize based off of knowing who your audience is. And so you can use content strategies just to relate to your audience better. So that's what this is kind of about. But it also leads us into some organizational strategies as well. So as you're thinking about how to organize your persuasive speech, you make sure that you establish a very clear SPS and thesis. So that way your speech stays on track the whole time and you're showing, well, yourself as you write, but also your audience exactly what you're planning to do. So as you're kind of developing your speech, you have to consider some questions like this. So consider the definition and the scope of your problem, consider the evaluative criteria, and then consider the practicality. So what do those things mean? So as you're considering the definition and the scope of your problem, okay, define the problem. What is it? And the scope, like how broad is it? Who is this going to affect? So if you're trying to persuade your audience that they have a problem, or maybe you're saying a problem exists but doesn't affect them, well, why would they be persuaded to take care of this at all then? So you have to consider how you can make that relevant to your audience. Then you have to give some evaluative criteria. So think about the grading criteria I use for our speeches. It's like, okay, I have my criteria in front of me and I'm circling these things to let you know if like, oh yes, you did that. You did it, but not that well, or you have area for improvement. So like that's how you know if you've done like what kind of job on your speech. So you want criteria for evaluating your solution. So okay, how am I going to know that my solution is effective? How I know that it's working? And lastly, practicality. So if something is practical, it means it's doable. So like, yeah, I think it'd be great to like buy a yacht, but that's not really practical because I live in Northwest Arkansas. So I don't really have an ocean near me or a place to store my yacht or money to pay for maintenance of a yacht or a yacht, period. So it's not really a practical thing to do. And so if you want to show how your solution is practical, it's like, okay, well, how do I actually do this? How can I actually make this happen? And for all of our organizational patterns we're going to learn, we need to make sure we consider all of these before we consider what pattern we want to utilize, because each pattern is going to offer different kind of opportunities for presenting this content to our audience. For all of the organizational patterns we're going to discuss today, the problem is going to be the first main point, because the problem is the most important thing in persuasion, so it's got to come first. I don't like that's a comma, not a period, so sorry. So you're going to build up suspense to a solution at the end, but catch your audience's attention immediately by convincing them that they have some sort of problem. So remember we talked about in our last unit about how if your audience has initial dissonance or there's tension or potential disagreement, you'll put that strongest point first. So we're going to do that here now, just because like you don't know how effective you'll be at persuasion. Most of the time, you won't know how well your audience will agree with you. We can talk in the third main point about if you have an audience that might agree with you or you know you can relate to them really well, what kind of pattern you could use. But for the most part, like you don't want to start with like, hey, here's a good solution. You should do it. Here's all the money it'll cost you. Here's all the things. And then, yeah, here's the problem that'll solve. No, like it's much more persuasive to start with the problem and be like, hey, here's a problem. It affects you. You have this problem. It's ruining your life. But chill, I can fix it. And tell them how easy it is to fix it. It's much more effective to start with the problem. So consider it as if your audience is going to have that initial dissonance with you. For our first organizational pattern for persuasion, this is one that y'all have actually already kind of dabbled with. It's the problem solution pattern. Now we use this in the sales pitch impromptu, but we only had the first two main points. We didn't have the third one. So it still looked pretty similar though. So problem solution is going to be best for a simple presentation where there's only one obvious solution. You just have to persuade your audience that the problem is actually big enough to want to pursue action. So be like, hey, this problem is big and you need to do something about it. And that the action is actually pursuable. So like, yeah, here's a solution, but like, why do I want to pursue that solution? How can I pursue that solution? So your emphasis is more on convincing the audience of the problem and how easy that solution is going to be. So here are your three main points: the problem, the solution, the practicality. And we're going to talk about this in our lecture on Monday, but it's very important to make sure you consider both sides as you are speaking. And so like, if I'm persuading my audience about like, hey, here's a problem you have, here's how to solve it. Well, like for every problem, like if it was a problem for everybody, people would have solved it by now. Does that make sense? It's like it's not a problem for everyone. It's like, hey, what are like both sides of this perceived problem? Or what are the positives of leaving this problem as it is, and things like that. Then you're gonna give your solution, and then you're gonna say how it would alleviate those negatives and enhance those positive you mentioned earlier. You can do both those things or just one or the other. And make sure you don't bring up something really important here, like, oh, one major negative is this, and then you never mention it ever again. Because it's like, wait, you mentioned that negative earlier. I don't want to do it now. And so make sure you bring up things that are gonna like make your audience like, hey, I'm trustworthy. I'm telling you this is something that is like a good thing and a bad thing. Here's why. That you are trying to like make it better for them. So make sure you are just being transparent and trying to address like all potential angles and sides of the issue. And then you'll explain how practical it is, how the solution is easy or realistic to accomplish, and then how they can actually get it done. So you can use problem solution or you can use problem cause solution. So this one just gets a little more specific into the fact that for some problems, the solution, you need to really think about what caused this. Like if I keep going to the hospital and I say, "Oh, I'm in pain," and they keep giving me like Tylenol, but it's like, "Oh, well, I was being vague. I actually am in emotional pain and I needed a therapist." But for some reason, I keep going to the hospital. It's like, okay, so the cause of the problem was really important there to know what the right solution was. So, problem cause solution is going to be best used for situations where understanding what causes the problem is really essential to selling your solution. So again, for the problem, establish those positives and negatives, and then you'll explain what the cause is. And again, maybe some positives and negatives. Um, it's not super firm. You have to do this for like every single main point. It's just a reminder, like you need to consider both sides of the argument. And just be transparent. You don't want to ignore like a very obvious other side of the coin, because again, like that does not show that you are credible and trustworthy, and that's very important for persuasion. And then third main point, how the solution would alleviate the negatives and or enhance the positives, specifically referencing the cause. Because again, like this is problem cause solution. The cause is really, really important. So make sure you reference that cause very clearly. And you'll put in practicality kind of with the third main point. So you're not going to really harp on it for too long. So just make sure you're very quick and to the point, like, hey, here's how we do this and here's why it's easy. So we have problem solution, problem cause solution, excuse me. Then we have comparative advantage. So earlier I mentioned that like if you have an audience who you think you can relate with, who might be more prone to agree with you, might be an option you could use because you're like, oh, they're probably gonna buy into my solution. Um, Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So this might be one you would use if your audience might relate with you a little more. But still notice that the problem is still gonna go first, and then you build up to the solutions. So it's best used for presentations where there might be more than one obvious and viable solution. Because if all the world's problems just had one solution, there wouldn't be any problems left. So there's probably going to be some problems we'll talk about where there's other solutions at hand. So this would be a pattern you would use that'd be appropriate for that. So you would address the problem, and then again, positives and negatives. Address what the solution is that you think would be best, how it would alleviate the negatives and or enhance the positives, and how it's practical. And then you would finish by being like, okay, well, yeah, I think this solution is the best one, but you're probably thinking, well, hey, why not just do this? Well, here's why. So you would describe the alternate solution and then offer a refutation or a rebuttal. And we're going to learn in Monday's lesson what a refutation or a rebuttal is. If you do, we don't do debate team. I think it's like youth and government or something. You're probably already very familiar with this. Um, Maybe you're just familiar with it because like your English classes. I don't know if y'all would do debate stuff in English, but refutation or rebuttal, basically, it's like just like arguing against like the alternative. So comparative advantage would be good for saying, hey, yeah, like I know there's alternatives, but here's why this one's actually the best. And so I really like this one just because there's usually someone in the Q&A who will be like, oh yeah, why don't we just do this? And it's like, buddy, I spent like 3 weeks doing research writing this speech. Like you think I didn't consider that? So it's easy to just go ahead and like get ahead of that person and be like, yeah, hey, there is that solution, but here's why mine is still better. So those are our three organizational patterns, and I'm sure there are more. These are just most common and most effective ones that I found in my research. So problem solution, problem cause solution, and comparative advantage. And then here's some examples. Sorry, this is so small. So let's say that I am a high school student and I want to convince my parents to let me get my driver's license. Maybe it's like, okay, I'm about to turn 16. They're kind of hesitant about it. And so I'm going to explain to them that the problem they're having is that they have to drive their kids around all the time. They have to take their kids to school, take their kids to practice, take their kids to friends' houses, do all the things. And I'm going to explain why it's a problem to them. I'll say there are some positives of them doing this. Like we get quality time together and the parent gets to control where everyone is. They don't have to worry about their child being on the road as a driver. But there are some negatives. I would say, yeah, you don't have much personal time though because you're busy driving us around. So then I'll say, yeah, that's a problem, but I have a solution for it. So I would explain that my solution is that I would get words are hard. I'll explain to my parents that if I get my driver's license, it will enhance some of those positives and alleviate some of the negatives. Now, I'm not gonna like get rid of all of these, but I'll probably address the most important ones. So I would address that they can still maintain control of where the family is by installing a tracking device on my car. If you have like a crazy parent like that. What? Just kidding. No, that's a totally fine thing to do. Actually, I don't know. I don't know if I would do that for my kid. I'll let y'all know when I get there. I'm not even a parent. I don't get to have an opinion. Um, did I say I don't even have a parent? I think I did. I do have parents. I said I'm not even a parent. I don't have kids. I don't get to have an opinion. We're getting off track though. Parents are great and they can do what they want. So I'm gonna say you can still maintain control by installing a tracking device on my car, or I can attend real driver's ed school and not just do like the self-taught thing. So I'm taught by the best. So that would kind of alleviate the not worrying about a young driver thing. And then I would say I will address that it could like bring back their personal time because I'd be taking my siblings to school and practice and running some errands. And so I'm addressing these like positives and negatives that I mentioned up here. And then I'm going to explain how it's practical. I'm going to provide the names and prices of local driver's ed schools that we could go to, and then all the prices involved for like the classes and the testing that I would need to do. And then I would also provide the forms to enroll for the school. So I'm not just going to tell them, I'm going to show them and make it as easy as possible. So like when you're persuading somebody and we're doing that call to action, like we want to make it as easy as possible for them to do the thing we're persuading them to do. It's like if you're trying to persuade somebody to recycle and you want them to start like sorting out their stuff, like bring them a recycling bin or like bring them a form to fill out to like mail out if like the city can drop them off one or something. Or for this, I would bring the forms to enroll for driver's ed school to my little presentation to my parents. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to actually be persuaded and to take action on what you've told them. That's our example for problem solution. Next, we have problem cause solution. So these last two are examples that I found online because I just had a big old brain fart and could not think of anything. And that's why they're a little bit shorter than this one. And so let's say for problem cause solution, the problem is like, man, they binge drinking in college. A lot of kids get to college and they just go crazy and they just drink a ton or they binge drink. So I'm going to say, okay, both sides of it. What are some positives and negatives? Does not seem like there'd be a ton of positives. And people will usually say like, oh, social interaction, give in to peer pressure, you make best of friends that way. And then obvious negatives, lowered inhibition, poor decision making, arrest, death, yikes. So I'm addressing both sides of it. So for that, like again, like you're showing your bias in this speech, and that's okay because like you're persuading, like it's very clear how you should feel about this topic. So like you're gonna say like, oh yeah, here's both sides of it. Here are the positives. Here are the negatives. The negatives outweigh the positives. So like you are showing both sides of it, but you're allowed to like stake your claim and pick your side. And then I'll explain what the cause is. So I'll say, while there are many reasons a student would want to binge drink in college, one major cause is the overwhelming sense of freedom and independence and this feeling of being anonymous that students find themselves with when they get to college. And then I'll do like a subpoint, like fleshing that out. So, okay, the problem, binge drinking, the cause of the binge drinking is that kids have this, they're overwhelmed by the freedom they have and they don't know how to make good choices. And so the solution is to have parents give their kids more opportunities to make their own decisions and face consequences of those decisions early on in the home. There's this whole paper about it that I found when I was looking up like speech stuff earlier. So I thought it was interesting. Thought it'd be relevant for y'all as well, basically college kids, since we're kind of done with real life school. So yeah, practicing decision making would be solutions. That way, it would fix the cause of like, oh, they've had freedom before because they've made their own decisions before, and then I could hopefully help them have better tools to make good decisions and not binge drink. So that was a very interesting example of problem cause solution. And for our last one, comparative advantage. So the problem would be, oh, okay, the problem is climate change. And they're explaining why it's a problem and what positives and negatives exist. Again, I found this one online, so that's why it's a lot shorter than the very first one. So problem, climate change, solution, tax corporations that have a big impact on climate change. And I'll explain how that could affect the positives and negatives I mentioned earlier. But then we got to compare though. So the big thing for climate change discussion is like, oh, well, is it like the responsibility of like the individual to like change their habits, or is it like a big corporation's responsibility? And so I'm going to explain the alternative. Okay, people have said that we encourage people to recycle and purchase eco-friendly products and vehicles. And then I'm going to explain why my solution will be more effective. So that would be comparing those two. And again, like even though you're giving both sides, I would say, okay, yeah, here's this side, but also here's this side. Here's an alternative, but mine's better. So make sure, like, you remember that, like, you're being polite, you're addressing both sides, you're making it clear to your audience they have choices, and you're giving them a full range of options. Excuse me. But you are trying to persuade them that your solution is the superior one. Um, and then that's it. That's where we are going to stop for today. Um, I think you'll have an assignment due tonight. Let me double check before I say anything. Yeah, I'm posting this on Friday, and your logical fallacy chart is due tonight. So just make sure that you get that all taken care of. And we're going to go over some of the answers and also talk about Frozen later next week. That's all I've got for you. I hope y'all have a great weekend. Stay cool out there.